He always came at noon. Quiet, methodical, invisible in the way certain men are when they don't try to be seen. At first, I didn't even know his name. The pool service just sent someone, an automatic convenience arranged by my husband after the last guy left mid-season. "They'll handle it," was all he said. "You don't need to think about it." Which was code for, "You're home more, but I'll still manage the decisions." His name was Dean. I only learned that when I overheard the neighbor say it while making small talk across the fence. She called out something about the chlorine levels and then added, "Thanks, Dean." He nodded, barely. Didn't look at her. Didn't smile. He didn't look at me either, that first week. Or the second. Or the third. He would come, skim, scrub, test, adjust, coil everything back into place, and leave. Sometimes I'd hear the gate click and peek through the blinds to see the back of him. Always in a white shirt, sleeves rolled, tan skin under pale fabric, shorts that hung low in the back and left a sharp triangle of his spine exposed when he bent to check the pump. I didn't mean to watch him. I didn't mean anything at all. I'm Vanessa, 46, married for 22 years. 2 children, 1 out of state, 1 finishing college. The house is large and quiet and always clean, though not in a proud way. Just tended to. We live in a suburb outside the city, with sidewalks wide enough for strollers and driveways wide enough for 2 cars that come and go in different rhythms. My husband travels 3 days at a time, sometimes 4. He sells insurance solutions, whatever that means. Long hours, presentations, hotel coffee. He leaves on Monday mornings with 2 shirts freshly pressed and a reusable coffee mug. He kisses my cheek like he's reminding me of the shape of his mouth, not offering warmth. On the 3rd day, he sends a text. "Everything good there?" I always say yes. Before Dean, the pool was just another feature. A blue square that shimmered when the sun was out, something to mention in small talk. I never swam in it. I rarely sat near it, but once, years ago, when I was still in my 30s and the kids were small and I still wore shorts in the summer without hesitation, I had floated for hours on an inflatable ring, letting the sun burn lines into my skin while I imagined what it would be like to disappear. Back then, I never wanted to be touched. Now, I just don't expect it. The first time I noticed Dean's hands, I wasn't looking for them. It was a Wednesday, the 3rd week of May. The air smelled like wet concrete. I just finished wiping down the counters when I heard the gentle swish of the skimmer. I turned, half expecting the old man they used to send, and there he was. He had pulled his shirt off. It was hot that day, too hot for spring. His skin was darker than I'd expected. His arms were lean, but not slight. Rope, coiled, deliberate. And his hands moved like they'd done this 1,000 times. Skim, pause, shake, dip again. Always in rhythm. I stood behind the glass door, unseen. A sip of coffee in one hand, my other hand tucked into the pocket of my robe. He didn't look up. But something changed. I don't know what exactly. Maybe nothing. Maybe just me. That night I made dinner even though no one was home. Chicken thighs, lemon, capers. Set the table, lit a candle, ate slowly. I wasn't hungry, but I needed the ritual. After the dishes, I sat on the couch with a book and didn't turn the page for over an hour. It wasn't that I was thinking about him. It was that my body still remembered not thinking, how it had felt to pause in the kitchen, holding my breath, watching the way sunlight slid over the muscles in his back. He never spoke. Not to me. The next week, I thought I'd catch him. Say something polite. Offer iced tea. Something friendly and forgettable. But he was already gone by the time I remembered. The pool sparkled. There was a smudge of dirt on the patio where his boots had been. I bent down to wipe it. Then I stood there too long. Friday morning. My husband home again. He asked if I'd reschedule my lunch with Claire. I thought we'd do something together, he said, not looking up from his phone. I said yes. Of course. He took me to a place with hard seats and soft bread. We sat near the window. He asked me about a neighbor's dog barking too early and something about trimming the hedges. I nodded, sipped, smiled. When he reached for my hand, I let him. But I looked out the window. The next week, I was ready. I wore the cotton dress I hadn't touched since last summer. No bra, just soft fabric and clean skin. It wasn't for him. I told myself that at least 3 times. He arrived later than usual. Noon had come and gone. I'd given up, turned on the laundry, walked into the bathroom, stared at myself too long. Then, the sound. The gate. The hose. The soft shift of water being moved. I opened the curtain just a bit. There he was. White shirt. Sunglasses. One hand steady on the pole, the other guiding it in arcs across the surface. He didn't look up. But I didn't move either. There's something about quiet men. They let you hear yourself. And when there's too much space, you fill it. With assumptions. With hope. With questions that have no words but ache anyway. Dean never tried to be charming. Never flirted. Never gave me an inch. Which is maybe why every half-second glance felt like a sentence. Maybe even a secret. One Thursday, I stepped outside to water the potted basil. He was crouched near the filter, arms wet, hair damp. He looked up. Just once. And in that moment, I felt something strange bloom in my stomach. Not excitement. Not lust. Something older. Slower. Like someone had remembered me. When I was 28, a man once told me I walked like I didn't need anyone. He said it with admiration. Now, at 46, I walk like I've already figured out how to need less. But that day, standing barefoot on the porch, hose in hand, I didn't feel minimal. I felt seen. I didn't tell anyone about him. Not because there was anything to tell. He never touched me. Never complimented me. Never lingered. But when I washed the sheets later that day, I held them to my face and wondered if he could smell the soft lavender from the patio. I wondered if his fingers remembered the grain of the wood railing. I wondered if I was going crazy. But I wasn't. I was just awake. Saturday. I wore lipstick to the grocery store. The clerk asked if I was headed somewhere after. I said no. Smiled anyway. The next time Dean came, I left the door slightly ajar. The breeze moved the curtain gently. I stood behind it. He walked past the window once. Stopped. Just for a breath. Then moved on. I started sitting by the window around noon. Pretending to scroll. Pretending not to wait. He always came. He never knocked. But he'd glance. Once. Always just once. And that glance? It was mine. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself. It lives in the way you stir your coffee. In the pause between questions at dinner. In the silence when you undress and no one's watching. I had lived in that space for years. Dean didn't fill it, but he illuminated it. And once you see it, really see it, you can't pretend it's not there. Last Monday, he parked a little slower. Closed the truck door a little louder. I was in the kitchen again, pretending to slice fruit. I watched his reflection in the glass. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder. Walked toward the gate. At the edge of the pool, he paused. Tilted his head back. Eyes closed. Sun on his face. I pressed my palm against the counter to stay steady. He skimmed slower that day. And I knew, even without words, that he felt it too. The edge. The shift. He didn't need to say a word. Because I had already stopped pretending I couldn't hear the silence. And he had already stopped pretending he wasn't leaving it behind for me. It was too hot for late spring. One of those mornings where the air hums even before breakfast. Where the walls feel soft with stillness. where I move slower like I'm walking through honey. I had just stepped out of the shower. Hair still damp, skin flushed, towel loose. I wasn't thinking, or maybe I was thinking too much. I poured a glass of iced tea and opened the back door. Barefoot, distracted, wearing what I shouldn't have worn. And that's when it stopped being about the water. He didn't say a word, just kept skimming. His back to me. But his rhythm broke. Just slightly. Just enough. The pole moved slower. He dipped it again, then paused like he was waiting for the leaves to shift on their own. I stood in the doorway, half shaded. My robe clung in places it shouldn't have. One tie looped but not pulled. The air touched parts of me I hadn't felt in months. He turned. Not a full turn. Just enough to catch me there. Glass in hand, wet hair, robe loosened by movement, and maybe also intention. He didn't smile. Didn't greet me. Just paused. Stared. A breath too long. Then, back to work. Except not really. Not the same. His strokes in the water became something else. Not efficient. Not mechanical. Deliberate. I stood still, glass cold in my hand. Watched his shoulders shift under sun-bleached cotton. Watched how the muscles in his forearm tightened, released. He wasn't showing off. He didn't need to. But each movement said something. Something silent. Something physical. Like, you stepped outside. And now I know. I walked down the patio steps, slow. Each one a decision. The tiles were hot. The air shimmered. The robe slipped just a bit as I sat at the edge of the lounge chair. I told myself it was innocent. Just sun. Just tea. Just a morning where the house felt too quiet and the outside was louder. But I could feel his glances. Not direct. Not obvious. But there, like the echo of a thought someone else is having about you. We said nothing, but the silence was louder than usual. I adjusted the hem of my robe, then left it alone. I crossed one leg over the other. The curve of my calf caught the light. He didn't stop working, but he didn't look away either. He rinsed the net slowly, let it drip longer than needed. His hands weren't just rinsing, they were waiting. My husband texted, boarding in 20. Love you. I stared at the message. Typed you too. Didn't send it. Deleted it. Typed safe flight. Sent that instead. Then put the phone screen down beside me. And didn't pick it up again for the rest of the hour. Dean knelt by the pump. Checked the filter. I heard the wrench click once. His shirt clung to his back. A darker line where sweat had gathered along his spine. He didn't need to be out here this long. He was always fast. Efficient. But today, he lingered. And so did I. When I went back inside, the robe was open. Not wide, but wide enough that I felt the breeze on the inside of my thigh. Wide enough that if he'd looked, really looked, he'd have seen more than he should. And maybe he did. Or maybe he didn't need to. Because knowing is sometimes quieter than looking. And the way he exhaled when he stood, the way he took an extra breath before coiling the hose, that told me everything. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay on top of the covers, the room cooled by the hum of the ceiling fan. The scent of chlorine still faint in the fabric of my robe. I replayed the moment he turned. The moment I didn't flinch. The moment I didn't pull my robe tighter and didn't pretend not to notice when it slipped. I had forgotten what it felt like to be watched. Not admired. Not assessed. Watched. The way you watch a flame and wonder if it'll grow or burn out. The way you notice heat before it touches you. It wasn't about beauty. Or age. Or shape. It was about presence. And mine had been invisible for a very long time. Until that day. The next time he came, I was ready again. Different robe. Thinner. Shorter sleeves. Iced tea again, but this time in a clear glass. Lemon slice. Intentional. He arrived early. I heard the truck before I expected it. I didn't move. Let him start. Let him feel alone. Then opened the door mid-task. Let it creak. Let it announce me. He didn't turn this time. But he slowed again. I sat in the same place. Crossed the same leg. Tilted my head to the same angle. And waited. He finished skimming and knelt beside the filter again. Hands dirty this time. Grease under the nails. I hadn't noticed his hands before. Not really. But that morning, they looked like they belonged in two worlds. Rough enough to fix things. Careful enough to fold a note no one else should see. When he rose, I thought he would leave. Instead, he walked to the edge of the patio. Closer than usual. Not close enough to cross anything, but enough to smell the tea. Enough to see the line of my collarbone. He looked down. Said nothing, then turned. Back to the hose. Back to the gate. I stayed outside after he left. The tea was warm by then. My robe had slipped more than it should have. I didn't fix it. Not right away. I sat with the heat. The silence. The echo of a moment that didn't quite happen, but felt louder than anything that did. When my husband called that night, I let it ring. He left a message. I didn't listen to it. The robe lay over the edge of the chair the next morning. Still wrinkled. Still holding the shape of where I'd leaned. I touched it like it was someone else's skin. And for a second, I felt a heat rise in me that had nothing to do with temperature. That evening, I opened my closet. Stared at my old summer things. Fabrics I hadn't worn since my last birthday. Fabrics that whispered against the skin. I ran my fingers over a white blouse. Held it to my chest. Didn't try it on. Just felt the weight of wanting to. And that was new. And terrifying. And necessary. The next week he didn't come. The weather was perfect. The pool was still. The robe stayed folded. I sat by the window anyway. Just in case. The day he returned, it was earlier than usual. I was in the shower. Steam on the glass. Hair slicked back. I heard the gate too late. Wrapped in a towel, I opened the bathroom door and stepped onto the hallway floor. Bare feet. Wet skin. No plan. He was already working, visible through the kitchen window. I stood where I was, the hallway light behind me. Let the towel hang lower. Didn't move. He didn't look. But he did not look either. It was like he'd memorized my shape already. And now he was just revisiting it with every pause. He took longer again. The coiling of the hose was slower. The cleaning more exact. Not for the pool. For me. For something else that didn't need to be named. As he walked toward the gate, he stopped near the door. Didn't knock. Didn't speak. But for a full breath, he stood. Like he might. Like he would. Then left. That night, I tied the robe tighter. Then looser again. Then took it off. And stared at myself in the mirror until the glass fogged. I sat on the edge of the lounge chair again. Still barefoot. Still loosely wrapped. Still pretending it was just sun I wanted on my skin. Dean didn't ask if I needed anything. Didn't greet me. Didn't even glance long enough to be accused of staring. But I felt it, each step he took on the concrete. Each pause at the edge of the pool. Each clink of plastic or metal or water folding over itself like breath. Something had changed, and it wasn't the pool. I started wearing the white blouse again. The one I hadn't touched since before the kids left home. Nothing dramatic. Just light fabric, loose enough to whisper. Lip balm became habit. Not for him, I told myself. Just for me. For the mirror. For the way it caught light when I pressed my lips together. But it was also for him. Even if he never saw it directly. He had become the thing I prepared for without acknowledging I was preparing. That Tuesday, he was early. And I was not ready. I was folding towels in the hallway, halfway through a thought I didn't remember later, when I heard the gate click. I panicked, ran to the bedroom, heart in my throat like I'd missed a deadline. I didn't know what I was looking for. Not clothes, I was dressed, but presence. I applied lip balm in the mirror twice, then stepped out slowly. He was skimming as always, but something about the way he held the pole was different. Like it wasn't just about reach, like every arc was a sentence spoken beneath breath. I watched from the doorway, my hand wrapped around the iced tea glass like it was an anchor. He didn't look at me, but the pause in his movement was acknowledgement enough. I sat on the same chair, pulled my knees up this time, hugged them slightly. He walked past me to check the pump. His steps didn't falter, but I saw his eyes flick, just once, toward the soft curve of my calf where the fabric had slipped. The silence was thick, not uncomfortable, but dense. Like the air between us wasn't empty anymore. Like it held a question we weren't brave enough to ask, and maybe already had answered. The next day I stood by the window again. I wasn't sure if he would come. It was cloudy, threat of rain, but I stood anyway, just long enough for the condensation to form where my fingers touched the glass. My husband came home that evening, tired, polite, asking about bills and weather and the neighbor's tree. He kissed my cheek. It felt like punctuation. And when we sat on the couch and he touched my thigh absently, I smiled, but didn't reach for him. I was already somewhere else. The robe had become a ritual, tied loosely, always loose. Even when I told myself it was about the heat, it wasn't. It was about exposure. Not to the sun, but to him. The next week, something shifted. I dropped a towel while carrying it outside. A soft, harmless thing. White, folded, meant for show. He was near the skimmer, crouched. I reached down to grab it. Just as he stood, our hands met the same fabric. Not skin, not intentional, but we both froze. My fingers brushed his knuckles. His hand pulled back first, but not quickly. A static passed between us. Not a spark. A hum, like recognition. He didn't say anything, but his breath caught, and mine stayed caught longer. I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep. I imagined the shape of his hand, not its strength, its stillness. The way it hovered over the towel like a decision unmade. There was a day I left the back door unlocked. Not by mistake. I let it sit open just a crack, curtains shifting in the light breeze. He didn't come in. Of course not. But he lingered near it. Longer than he needed to. The air between us that morning felt like it had teeth. At night, I dreamed in blue. The shade of pool water just before dusk. The hue of his shirt, soaked through with sweat. In the dreams, I wasn't doing anything scandalous. I was just there, being seen, being watched, being held in stillness, and always near water, always half submerged. One morning, my husband made coffee. He kissed my shoulder as I stood at the sink. I didn't flinch, but I didn't lean back either. He asked if I'd be okay alone that week. I said I liked the quiet. He smiled, but I didn't. I began sitting out earlier, not waiting for Dean, preparing for him. Choosing the mug instead of the glass. Letting my hair air dry. Choosing fabrics that moved. He always arrived without announcement. But by then, I was already in place. Not posed, just available. He didn't ask questions. Never commented on the weather. Never complimented me. But once, when I handed him a bottle of solution he'd left near the patio, our fingers touched again. And this time, he didn't pull away first. That same evening, I looked at myself in the mirror. Not to check makeup. Not to fix hair. Just to look. My collarbones were sharper than I remembered. The slope of my shoulder was softer. I didn't smile. But I didn't turn away either. I began noticing things. How his shirt always had one button undone near the top. How he hummed, low and almost inaudible, when he stirred the chlorine. How his lips pressed into a thin line when he lifted the skimmer too full of leaves. I began memorizing him. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to, and hadn't wanted anything in a very long time. There was a moment, a Tuesday, when he knelt by the pool and I stood behind him with the towel. He turned. We were closer than we'd ever been. Not touching, but close. And in that moment, I saw something in his eyes that unmade me. Not hunger, not desire, recognition. As if he'd seen the same ache in his own reflection once. I said softly, "Need anything?" He shook his head. Just once, but didn't look away. That night, my husband touched my hand at dinner. I looked up, startled. He smiled, warm, and for a second, I forgot how to return it. Because I was still somewhere else. By the pool. In the silence. Being looked at like I was real. One morning I said Dean's name to myself. Quietly. Barely audible. Like a prayer or a confession. I felt my pulse in my lips after I did. The space between us never closed. Not literally. He never crossed a line. Never made a move. But the air between us had changed density. It was no longer just weather. It was atmosphere. He cleaned the pool like it mattered. And I sat like I was just sunbathing. But we both knew the performance had stopped being convincing. I didn't need to be touched. I needed to remember what it felt like to be magnetic. To change the temperature of a room just by standing in it. And somehow he'd given me that. Without speaking, without asking. One evening, my husband said my name in bed. Softly, like he used to. But it wasn't him I felt when he said it. It was the sound of the hose uncoiling. The glint of sun off wet pavement. The pause before Dean turned around. I responded to the name, but not to the voice. In the mirror, the next morning, I didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked older, but because I looked present. And I hadn't in years. He came early. No sound from the truck. No warning from the gate. Just the hose stretching across the patio, already wet, already moving. I hadn't planned to be outside yet, but I was. Somehow, a thin dress, the kind that moves when you breathe. No robe. No iced tea. Just skin, just the hour, just me. I stood by the glass door for longer than I should have, watching him move through water like he was part of it. He didn't look up. Not when I stepped outside. Not when my shadow crossed the concrete. Not when my bare feet made soft sounds on the tile. But he knew. I know he did. His back stiffened slightly, then relaxed again. He skimmed, paused, lifted the net, let it drain. Every motion deliberate, every second slow. I sat. Same lounge chair. Same angle. Only this time, I didn't cross my legs. There was no wind. The leaves on the surface of the pool barely drifted. The water was clear, still, obedient, but something in me was not. He finished cleaning. Didn't rush. Didn't stall either. He coiled the hose slowly. Loop after loop, neat and practiced. He wiped the edges of the skimmer, ran a hand through his hair once. His shirt stuck to his back like a second skin. The sky was too blue. And I was too quiet. When he walked toward the gate, he passed near me. Not close enough for contact, but enough to feel the weight of his presence in the air. Then he stopped, right at the edge of my chair. Not looking directly at me, not facing fully. And with a voice that didn't sound like it belonged to the moment, he said, "You forgot to tie it." It wasn't a flirtation. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't even a warning. It was a noticing. A truth dropped between us like a match into dry grass. I looked down. The strap of my dress, barely there to begin with, had slid off my shoulder. The neckline open. Not wide, but enough, or maybe exactly enough. My knee tilted outward. My body language too calm, too undone. He saw. He had been seeing. I didn't cover myself. Didn't adjust. Didn't speak. I just looked at him. Not pleading. Not daring. Just there. And then he walked. To the gate. Through it. He closed it gently. One click. No slam. No hurry. Just gone. I didn't move for a long time. The warmth of the sun turned soft and dull across my thighs. The ice in my glass melted hours ago. The air held a different kind of heat now. Not lust. Not shame. Something harder to define. Something final. I stepped back into the house like someone exiting a stage. Slow, reverent. Aware of what had just ended or begun. That night, I showered late. I let the water scald my skin. Let the steam rise until the mirror disappeared. I stood with my hands against the tile, remembering the shape of silence. Not his silence, mine. The one that followed his words. You forgot to tie it. And how much of me, in that moment, wanted to say, I know. My husband came home the next day. Suitcase in one hand. Kiss on the cheek. Shirt wrinkled from the drive. He asked about the pool. I said it looked good. He nodded. That night, he held me. And for the first time in weeks, I let him. Not out of guilt. Not out of duty. Because I needed to feel the contrast. His touch was careful. Familiar. The kind of affection that comes from decades, not days. But my body was already tuned to something else. To the quiet between movements. To the way a man could look without touching and still change the air around you. I didn't cry. Not then. Not later. But when I folded laundry the next morning, I found the robe at the bottom of the basket. Soft. Still faintly scented. I held it for a moment, pressed it to my face, then placed it gently in the drawer. Dean didn't come back the following week. No truck. No hose. No quiet footsteps across the stone. I waited. 2 days. Then 4. By the 5th, I called the company. They said he'd finished his seasonal contract early. No explanation. Just off the schedule. I nodded, thanked them, hung up, and stood in the kitchen, hands still around the phone, like I was holding onto something that had already dissolved. I walked outside later that day. The pool was clean. Still. Bright even. And yet I stood at its edge and didn't see the water. I saw a moment. Frozen. A shoulder exposed. A man's voice low and unguarded. A gate swinging gently in the sun. I whispered, "You forgot to tie it." Said it to the air. To the chlorine. To no one. But I heard it this time, and it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like something left behind to keep me company. Days passed. Then a week. I returned to my routines. Groceries. Phone calls. Garden beds. The house was the same. But I wasn't. I no longer stood by the window at noon. But I wore the white blouse anyway. Not for watching. Just because it remembered. My husband noticed. "You've seemed different lately," he said over dinner. "Good different?" I asked, stirring my fork through rice. He shrugged. "Just quieter. Like you're somewhere else." I smiled. "I'm here." And I was. Just not entirely. There are versions of ourselves we forget how to reach. Until someone, without trying, without touching, maps the way back. Dean didn't ask for anything. Didn't take anything. Didn't even stay long enough to see what he changed. But I carry him now. Not like a secret. Not like a shame. Like a door. I think that's the part no one talks about. That some stories don't need a climax to rearrange your life. Sometimes, it's the breath before the question. The pause before the look. The weight of noticing that shifts everything you thought was still. I make coffee the same way. but I sip it slower now. I wear the robe still, but tie it tighter. Not because I'm hiding, because I choose when it opens. The pool remains. The chair still sits in the same place. The sun still hits the same angle at 11:45. But I don't wait there anymore. I pass through. Sometimes barefoot. Sometimes with tea. But always with something different under my skin. A memory of stillness that turned to heat. A man who never looked away. And a version of myself who finally remembered how to step outside.